Everyone tells you to trust your family, but nobody tells you what to do when your family is the reason someone is suffering in silence. My name is Maren. I'm 31 years old, and 14 months ago, I became the full-time caregiver for my husband's father, a man I genuinely loved, a man who had taught me how to make his grandmother's apple cake, the first Christmas I spent with their family. His name was Harold. He was 74, sharp-tongued in the best way, and then one November morning, a massive stroke took most of what made him Harold and left behind a body that needed round-the-clock care. My husband Owen. No, I said I'd call him what he is now. My husband. We moved into Harold's house 2 weeks after the stroke. My husband said it was temporary. He said we'd figure something out after the holidays. That was 14 months ago. At first, caring for Harold felt like something I was built for. I'd been a pediatric nurse for 6 years before I left to work part-time from home. I knew wound care. I knew medication schedules. I knew how to read someone's face when their mouth couldn't form the words. Harold couldn't speak clearly after the stroke. Thick, slurred sounds that sometimes came close to a word and sometimes didn't. But his eyes were completely there, present, aware, watching. What changed things for me was a Sunday in late October. Harold had good days and bad days. On good days, he'd squeeze my hand twice when I asked if he wanted the window open. On bad days, he'd stare at the ceiling, and the light in his eyes went somewhere I couldn't follow. The Sunday I'm talking about was supposed to be a good day. He'd eaten breakfast, he'd squeezed my hand, he'd watched half a football game. Then my husband's younger brother showed up. His name was Garrett. No, I'm not using his name. He's the brother-in-law. That's all he gets. My brother-in-law had a habit of showing up unannounced, which my husband always framed as, he just really loves Dad. He'd stay for an hour or two, sit in the recliner, talk loudly about his job, his girlfriend, whatever deal he was putting together. Harold would look at him with this careful expression I couldn't quite read. Not warmth, exactly. More like the look you give someone you've decided not to argue with anymore. That Sunday, I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard it go quiet in the living room. No TV, no talking, the kind of quiet that prickles the back of your neck. I came to the doorway and looked in. Harold was alone. His jaw was set in a way I'd never seen before. Tight, rigid, like he was holding something in. His eyes were aimed at the hallway where my brother-in-law had just gone toward the study. Harold's study. I didn't think much of it then. I told myself he'd just gone to find the remote. But 2 days later, I went to pay the electric bill online and found Harold's bank account had a $340 charge to an electronics retailer I'd never heard of. Harold hadn't left the house in 11 days. I told my husband. He said his brother had probably ordered something for Harold, a speaker, a better remote, something like that. He'd ask him about it. He never asked him. The next Sunday, my brother-in-law came again. And when he left, Harold's face had that same lockjaw expression, that same fixed stare at the hallway. I put my hand over his. He squeezed once. Hard. Not the gentle twice squeeze for yes, one hard squeeze, like a warning. I started paying attention differently after that. I noticed Harold would go stiff when his son walked through the door, not with my husband. Harold would track my husband's movement with something like relief. But the brother-in-law, his presence made Harold's hands curl in his lap, made him turn his head slightly toward the window. I noticed that 3 times in 2 weeks, Harold's afternoon medication was short by 1 pill. I kept the blister packs in a locked cabinet, but I'd been giving my brother-in-law a spare key to the house since the first week. I stopped mentioning things to my husband. Not because I didn't trust him, but because every time I brought something up, the answer was the same. He means well, he's just not good at this kind of thing. You know how he is. And then nothing would happen, and I'd feel like I was the one making something out of nothing. That's a feeling I recognized. I'd felt it for most of our marriage, actually, but that's a different story. What finally made me act was a Thursday afternoon, when I came in from getting the mail and found my brother-in-law in Harold's room. The door wasn't fully closed. I stopped in the hallway. Harold was in his chair by the window. My brother-in-law was crouched next to the nightstand, and the drawer was open. I heard him say, quietly, almost sweetly, and it was the sweetness that made my skin crawl, You don't need this stuff anyway, Pop. You can't even use it. Harold made a sound, low, effortful. He was trying to say something. Relax, my brother-in-law said. I'm just borrowing. You don't even know what you have. I didn't walk in. I should have. I wanted to. But something in me knew that if I walked in right then, he'd explain it away. My husband would hear his version first, and I'd be left standing there, holding nothing but my own suspicion. I needed more than suspicion. I ordered the cameras that night. 4 of them. 1 in Harold's bedroom, 1 in the living room, 1 covering the study door, 1 in the hallway. I set them up over 2 days while my brother-in-law wasn't there, tucking them behind books and under the lip of shelves. I told Harold. I sat down in front of him, held both his hands and said, I'm putting cameras up. I'm going to watch what happens when I'm not in the room. I need you to trust me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he squeezed my hand twice. Yes, my husband didn't know. I want to be clear about that. I'm not proud of it. I've thought about it a lot since. But I also knew that if I told him, he'd tell his brother, and the cameras would catch nothing. And Harold would be left alone with a man who opened his nightstand and called it borrowing. The first 3 days, nothing remarkable. My brother-in-law didn't come. I checked the footage every evening after Harold was settled for the night, fast-forwarding through hours of Harold watching TV, Harold napping. The aide we had Tuesday mornings helping him with his bath. The footage from the following Sunday changed everything. I was at the grocery store. I'd been gone 45 minutes. My brother-in-law had a key. When I sat down that evening with my laptop, I had to watch the first clip 3 times because I kept stopping it. My hands wouldn't stay still. It started ordinary. My brother-in-law came in around noon, called out a greeting toward the back of the house, and went straight to the study. Study camera caught him at the desk, Harold's desk, going through the top drawer. He found a checkbook. I watched him photograph 3 blank checks with his phone. I paused the footage. I sat with that for a minute. Just breathed. Then I kept watching. He went into Harold's room. Harold was awake, tracking him with those steady, present eyes. My brother-in-law sat on the edge of the bed. Not the chair, the bed, too close. The posture of someone who knows they have the power. And he talked in that same low, sweet voice I'd heard in the hallway. You're not going to remember any of this tomorrow, are you, Pop? Harold made a sound. The doctors said your memory's going. He shrugged, like he was commenting on the weather, so it doesn't really matter if I take a few things. You won't even know they're gone. Harold's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. His knuckles went white. Besides, my brother-in-law said, leaning back, you always liked me better than Owen anyway, so you'd want me to have it. Harold turned his head toward the window. Away from him. A deliberate, slow turn. My brother-in-law stood up, stretched, and said, I'll see you next week, Pop, like they'd just had a nice visit. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Here is what I knew, sitting there. Harold's memory was not going. His memory was fine. His speech was impaired. His mobility was gone, but his cognition was largely intact. I'd had that conversation with his neurologist 6 weeks after the stroke. My brother-in-law either knew that and was lying to Harold's face, or he'd built an entire narrative around Harold's condition to justify what he was taking. Either way, Harold had been sitting in that room, every Sunday, listening to someone tell him his mind was disappearing. Someone who then photographed his checkbook. I thought about the medication that kept going short. I thought about the hard, warning squeeze. I thought about the look on Harold's face every Sunday after his son left. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I did 4 things before my husband woke up. I called Harold's bank and flagged the account for a fraud alert. I took photographs of every item in Harold's nightstand and dresser, jewelry, documents, a small amount of cash, and texted them to myself with timestamps. I backed up every clip from the past week to a private cloud drive, and I made an appointment with an elder law attorney for Wednesday. Then I made coffee and waited. My husband came downstairs and said his brother was coming Sunday. Could I make sure there was enough in the fridge for lunch? Sure, I said. Absolutely. I spent the week the way you spend time before something you know is coming. Carefully, I cross-referenced Harold's bank statements going back 8 months. 4 charges I couldn't account for. a total of a little over $2,000. I found one of the photographed checks had been cashed for $600, payable to a name I didn't recognize, endorsed by someone who wasn't Harold. I printed everything. Wednesday, the attorney explained to me what financial elder abuse looked like, what evidence was needed, and what the reporting process involved. She was matter-of-fact about it. She said it was more common than people thought, and that family members were the most frequent perpetrators. She told me what to preserve, what to document, and what not to do. Specifically, she told me not to confront him alone. I went home and updated my folders. I had one for financial exploitation, one for psychological manipulation, one for medication irregularities. The medication folder bothered me the most, honestly. I couldn't prove intent, but I also couldn't prove it wasn't intent. Sunday came. I told my husband I had to run to the pharmacy and then stop by a friend's place. I'd be back by 2. He kissed me on the cheek. His brother was coming at noon. I drove around the block and parked where I could see the front of the house from down the street. At 12:04, my brother-in-law's car pulled into the driveway. I tapped into the live feed on my phone. 4 screens. I put in my earbuds. Study camera, living room camera, hallway camera, Harold's room. For the first 20 minutes, nothing. He was in the kitchen. I could hear cabinet sounds, the refrigerator opening. Then he went to the study. I switched to that camera, watched him sit down at Harold's desk. He opened the bottom drawer this time, took out a small lockbox. I knew that lockbox. It had Harold's military discharge papers, his wife's death certificate, and a coin collection his own father had left him. I had no idea my brother-in-law knew where it was. He turned it over in his hands, shook it, set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called someone. I couldn't hear the other side, but I heard him say, "Yeah, I've got the box. No, I don't have the combination yet. I'll figure it out." Pause. He's not going to say anything. He literally cannot talk. I pressed my hand over my mouth. He said, "And even if he could, who's going to believe a guy who can't put 2 words together?" I had heard enough. I drove back, parked, and walked through the front door like I'd just gotten home. My husband was in the living room, watching something on his laptop, headphones on. He didn't notice the way I was breathing. I walked straight to the study. My brother-in-law looked up from the desk. The lockbox was back in the drawer. I could tell he'd put it away quickly. He gave me his usual easy smile. "Hey, back already? Sit down," I said. Something in my voice made him stop smiling. "What?" I set my phone on the desk with the live feed, still blinking, recording. I said, "The camera in the corner of this room has been running since last Sunday. So has the one in Harold's bedroom. So does the one in the hallway. Everything you do in this house, I've been watching." The color left his face in stages, like water draining. "You recorded me? You can't do that. You told someone on the phone 20 minutes ago that Harold can't talk and that nobody would believe him. I have that recording. I also have you photographing his checkbook. I have the cashed check. I have the bank statements." He stood up, taller than me by almost a foot. He took a step toward the door, toward the hallway, toward Harold's room, and I stepped sideways between him and the door. "Don't," I said. I wasn't doing anything. His voice had shifted to something I recognized. Reasonable, measured, the tone designed to make you feel like you misunderstood. "I was just looking for something. You've completely misread this." I didn't misread the phone call. His jaw tightened. "I want you to go," I said. "I want your key to this house, and I want you to understand that what you were doing has a name." He didn't move. So I walked to the hallway and opened my husband's door and said, "I need you to come hear something." My husband pulled off his headphones, looked at my face, stood up without asking questions, and I will give him that. I will always give him that moment. The 3 of us stood in the study and I played the audio clip from my phone. My brother-in-law's voice, low and certain. He's not going to say anything. He literally cannot talk. And then, who's going to believe a guy who can't put 2 words together? My husband went very still. His brother said, "She set me up. She's been running some surveillance operation in your own house, Owen. That's the issue here. That's what you should be asking about." My husband looked at his brother for a long time. Then he said, "Give her the key." I've thought about that moment a lot. The way something can collapse, and you don't even see it fall. My brother-in-law put the key on the desk. He looked at me with something in his eyes. I'm not going to call anything except what it was. Fury at being caught. Not remorse. Fury. He left. Within the hour, I had called Adult Protective Services, Harold's bank, and the elder law attorney. The attorney had already been waiting. I sent her the full file. 7 days of footage, the bank records, the phone call, the medication logs, with the discrepancies circled. My husband sat with Harold that afternoon. I don't know what they said to each other. I gave them the room. When I came in to help Harold with his dinner, my husband was sitting beside his father's chair, his head bent forward, and Harold's hand was resting on top of his head, just resting there, the weight of it. Harold looked at me over my husband's shoulder. He blinked slowly, once. I nodded. What came next took time. It always does. An APS investigator came to the house and spent 2 hours with Harold, going through a carefully adapted yes or no interview. Harold answered every question without hesitation. He knew what had been taken. He knew who had taken it. He'd known for months. The lockbox combination, it turned out, was the year his wife was born. His brother-in-law hadn't figured it out. He'd never get to. The bank traced the cashed check and flagged 2 more that had been submitted but not yet processed. Those were stopped. A report was filed with the state. My brother-in-law hired a lawyer. His lawyer tried to argue that Harold lacked the cognitive capacity to reliably report abuse, which was, I'll say it plainly, a strategy designed to use Harold's disability against him. It didn't work. Harold's neurologist submitted documentation of his intact cognition. The attorney submitted mine. The footage spoke in a register no one could spin. At one point, my brother-in-law's lawyer made a comment in a filing about the cameras being a violation of privacy. The judge noted that the home belonged to Harold, that Harold had been informed of the cameras, and that Harold had provided consent through documented nonverbal communication. My husband sat in the hallway of the courthouse during the hearing and didn't go in. I sat next to him for a while. He kept turning his father's watch over in his hands. Harold had given it to him that morning without a word, just held it out. Neither of us said anything about that. My brother-in-law was charged with financial elder abuse, elder exploitation, and fraud. He pled down to 2 counts. He was sentenced to 2 years, with the possibility of parole after 14 months, and ordered to make full restitution. Every dollar accounted for, plus the appraised value of a watch that had been missing from Harold's dresser since August, which we hadn't even realized was gone until the investigators asked about it. Harold found out the verdict on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting next to him when I told him. I said, "It's done. He's been held accountable. The money's coming back. You're not going to see him here again." Harold's chin moved. There was a sound, quiet, effortful, the kind of sound that cost him something. 2 syllables. It wasn't clear enough to make out, not quite. But his eyes were wet and he squeezed my hand twice. Yes, I've been back to the attorney twice since then, both times to help other families in the area who heard what happened. Word travels in ways you don't expect, through a neighbor, through the daughter of someone at Harold's physical therapy, through a woman at church who'd been worried about her mother-in-law for a year and didn't know where to start. I don't have a hotline. I don't have an organization. I have a phone number and a willingness to sit across from someone and say, "Here's what you document. Here's who you call. Here's how you make sure they're believed." Harold's room gets morning light now. We found an audiobook app that will read to him, and his face when a voice he likes comes on is one of the best things I've seen in a long time. His physical therapist comes Tuesdays and Thursdays. He has a good aide. On Sundays, my husband makes the apple cake from Harold's grandmother's recipe. It's not as good as Harold's yet, but he's getting closer. And Harold's expression, when he takes a bite, is something between judgment and love, which feels like a very Harold expression. He squeezes once when I ask if he's okay, sometimes twice, just to keep me guessing. People talk about caregiving like it's a burden you carry. And sometimes it is. But there's something that happens when you decide that someone's dignity is worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth disrupting your entire life for. And that thing is harder to name than burden. It's more like a choice that keeps asking you to make it. Every day, and every day you do. Harold can't tell his own story. Not in words. But he's here, and he's seen, and he's safe. Sometimes that's the whole thing. Sometimes that's everything. And if anyone reading this is watching someone they love go quiet in a way that doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. Document. Ask questions. Make the call. The silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means no one has listened carefully enough yet. Listen carefully.